He died on August 16th, 1977. But he never really left. His face is everywhere. His voice is a constant. We know the story. A poor boy from Tupelo, Mississippi becomes the biggest star in the world. He changes music, culture, everything. Then he gets trapped by his own fame. He dies too young in his own bathroom. It's a tragedy, it's a myth, but is an original story. What if the script for his life was already written? Not in a prophecy, but in the pages of classic books he may never have even read. He had a twin brother who died at birth. He made a deal that gave him the world, but cost him his freedom. He lived in a gilded cage, a king in a lonely castle. These aren't just biographical facts. They are literary tropes. They are the building blocks of the greatest stories ever told. The coincidences are more than just passing similarities. They are deep structural echoes. They appear in Shakespeare and Greek tragedy and American novels and Gothic horror. It's as if his life was a grand unconscious performance of literature's most powerful themes. Was he just playing a part that was written long before he was born? Or does human life, especially a life lived at the extremes of fame and sorrow, naturally fall into these ancient patterns? The connections are strange, and they are specific. And there are at least 18 of them. Number 18, was he always living for two? The story of Elvis Presley begins with two heartbeats. On January 8th, 1935, in a two-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi, Gladys Presley gave birth to twins. The first, Jesse Garon, was stillborn. 35 minutes later, Elvis Aaron came into the world, alive and screaming. This single event, this shadow presence at the very moment of his birth, might be the key to his entire life. It is a beginning straight out of a Gothic novel. The theme of the double, the doppelgänger, the lost twin is a powerful and unsettling one in literature. It speaks to a fractured identity, a sense of incompleteness, a life haunted by what could have been. Elvis lived this theme. His mother, Gladys, reportedly told him that when one twin died, the one that lived got all the strength of the other. This wasn't just a comforting story, it was a burden. He was tasked with living a life big enough for two people. Think of Robert Louis Stevenson's 1886 novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll creates a second self-Hyde to indulge his darker impulses. The two are one person, locked in a battle for control. For Elvis, the split was different. There was Elvis, the polite, gospel-loving son, and there was Elvis the Pelvis, the dangerous, sexualized rock and roll star. These two identities often seemed at war. The public Elvis was a carefully managed product. The private Elvis was a man wrestling with loneliness, insecurity, and spiritual searching. He wasn't split between good and evil like Jekyll. He was split between the living man and the ghost of his brother. This haunting is even more vivid in Fyodor Dostoevsky's 1846 novella, The Double. The protagonist, Golyadkin, is a low-level government clerk who is driven mad when he meets his exact double. This new Golyadkin is everything the original is not: confident, charming, and successful. The double slowly takes over his life, usurping his identity until the original is carted off to an asylum. Elvis's double wasn't a physical person, it was the myth. Elvis, the icon, became more real, more powerful than Elvis the man. The image took over. It dictated where he could go, what he could sing, how he had to look. Like Golyadkin, the original man was eventually destroyed by the success of his other self. Biographer Peter Guralnick, in his definitive work Last Train to Memphis, details how Elvis would often visit Jesse's unmarked grave. He spoke to his brother. He felt a connection that never faded. This wasn't just grief. It was a fundamental part of his identity. Psychological studies on twinless twins often describe a profound, lifelong sense of loneliness and survivor's guilt. The survivor can feel like an imposter, undeserving of the life they have. They search for a sense of wholeness that they can never find. This perfectly describes Elvis's constant search for meaning, his spiritual quests, his need to surround himself with his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, as if to fill the void left by his other half. Was his incredible energy on stage, his need to connect with thousands of fans, a desperate attempt to feel whole? Was the persona of the king of creation so large it could contain the lives of two men? And when he looked in the mirror, especially in his lonely final years, did he see himself, or did he see the ghost of the brother he never knew? Number 17. Did a Southern Gothic curse follow him? Elvis was born and raised in the American South. This is not just a geographical fact. It is a literary one. The South of his youth was the world of William Faulkner, of Tennessee Williams, of Carson McCullers. It was a world of faded glory, intense family dramas, and characters haunted by the past. This is the world of Southern Gothic literature, and Elvis Presley was its ultimate character. Southern Gothic isn't about ghosts and vampires in the traditional sense. It's about the grotesque realities of life in a region grappling with its own history of poverty, race, and defeat. The stories are filled with decaying plantations, eccentric and deeply flawed characters, and a sense of claustrophobia. Graceland, his Memphis mansion, became a real-life version of a Southern Gothic setting. You know, it was a garish, opulent fortress against the outside world, but inside it was a place of isolation and decay, like the Compson family home in Faulkner's The Sound in The Fury, 1929. Graceland was a monument to a past that could never be recaptured, a place where time seemed to stand still while its inhabitants slowly fell apart. Consider the characters. Elvis's relationship with his mother, Gladys, was one of overwhelming, almost suffocating love. It was the kind of intense, complex family bond that Tennessee Williams specialized in. Think of Tom and his mother Amanda in The Glass Menagerie, 1944. Amanda lives through her children, pinning all her hopes and lost dreams on them. Gladys did the same with Elvis. Her death in 1958, when Elvis was just 23, was a blow from which he never truly recovered. It was the central tragedy of his life, a wound that festered. In the Southern Gothic tradition, the family is not a source of strength, but a crucible of psychological torment. The grotesque element of the genre is also present. The public image of the young, beautiful Elvis slowly transformed into the bloated, sequined figure of the Las Vegas years. This physical decline, documented in countless unflattering photos, is a classic Southern Gothic trope. It is the outward manifestation of inner decay. Blanche Dubois in Williams's A Streetcar, named Desire, 1947, clings to her illusions of youth and refinement as her world collapses around her. Elvis, too, clung to the image of the king, even as his health failed and his addictions consumed him. The jumpsuits were his paper lantern, an attempt to hide the harsh light of reality. The critic C. Hugh Holman defined the Southern Gothic as a story that explores a sense of the alienated and the dispossessed. Despite his immense fame and wealth, was anyone more alienated than Elvis Presley? Trapped in his mansion, unable to walk down the street, surrounded by sycophants, he was a prisoner of his own success. He was a character straight out of a Flannery O'Connor story, a man touched by a strange kind of grace, but ultimately unable to escape his own flawed nature and the strange, haunted landscape that produced him. Was Graceland not a home, but a beautiful, customized tomb? Did the intense, almost Freudian love for his mother create a psychological wound that fame and money could never heal? And was his slow public self-destruction simply the final act of a Southern Gothic tragedy that was set in motion the day he was born in Mississippi? Number 16 was his manager, a modern-day Mephistopheles. Every great tragedy needs a catalyst. For Elvis Presley, that catalyst was a former carnival barker named Colonel Tom Parker. Their relationship was one of the most successful and most destructive in entertainment history. It was also a perfect echo of one of literature's oldest and darkest bargains, the Faustian deal. The legend of Faust, a scholar who sells his soul to the devil in exchange for unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures, has been told many times. The most famous versions are Christopher Marlowe's play The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus c. 1592, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's epic poem Faust, 1808. In the story, the devil's agent, Mephistopheles, appears to Faust and offers him a deal. He can have everything he desires, but at a price. After a set number of years, his soul belongs to the devil. Colonel Parker was Elvis's Mephistopheles. He wasn't the devil, of course, but he was a master manipulator, a man with a mysterious past. He was an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands named Andreas van Queich, a fact he hid his entire life, and a single-minded focus on profit. When he met Elvis in 1955, he saw not a musical revolution, but a product. The deal he struck was astonishing. He would become Elvis's exclusive manager, and in return, he would take an unprecedented 50% of Elvis's earnings. This was far beyond the industry standard of 10 to 15%. Like Faust, Elvis got what he wanted. Parker delivered fame and fortune on a scale the world had never seen. He secured the record deal with RCA Victor, the national television appearances on shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, and the lucrative movie contracts. Elvis became a global phenomenon, but the price was his artistic freedom and ultimately his soul. And Parker's choices were always commercial, never artistic. He pushed Elvis into a string of terrible, formulaic Hollywood movies throughout the 1960s because they were easy to produce and made guaranteed money. He famously said, "I don't care what he does, as long as he's not on a boat with a bunch of girls." Wait, that's one of our pictures. The most damning part of the bargain came later. As the world of music changed, Elvis was stuck. Peter Parker turned down countless opportunities for Elvis to tour internationally. Why? Because Parker had no passport and feared he would not be allowed back into the United States if he left. His personal situation shackled the world's biggest star to America. The deal that gave Elvis the world literally prevented him from seeing it. Instead, Parker booked him into the International Hotel in Las Vegas. It was a gilded cage, a profitable prison. Elvis was forced to perform a relentless schedule, sometimes 2 shows a night, for weeks on end. It was this grueling routine that deepened his dependence on prescription drugs to wake up and to fall asleep. In Marlowe's play, Faustus has moments of doubt. He considers repenting, but Mephistopheles is always there to distract him with trinkets and women, reminding him of the deal. The members of the Memphis Mafia have reported similar moments, times when Elvis expressed frustration with the movies or the Colonel's control. But he never broke free. The deal was too powerful. The lifestyle it provided was too seductive. He had sold his artistic soul for a kingdom of cheap movie scripts and Las Vegas suites. Did Colonel Parker know he was slowly killing his golden goose? Or did he simply not care as long as the money kept coming in? Was Elvis aware of the trap he was in? Or was he, like Faust, too blinded by the glamour to see the damnation at the end of the road? And what is the real difference between selling your soul to a demon for power and selling your art to a manager for fame? Number 15, was he a king? Trapped in a gilded cage. Fame is a prison with golden bars. This is a common idea now, but Elvis Presley was one of the first to live out its full, tragic meaning. His home, Graceland, became his world. He was a king, but a king under house arrest. This situation mirrors a very specific and haunting literary image, the one found in Alfred, Lord Tennyson's 1832 poem, The Lady of Shalott. The poem tells the story of a mysterious woman who lives in a tower on an island called Shalott, near Camelot. She is under a curse. She cannot look directly at the outside world. If she does, the curse will activate. So she spends her days weaving a magical web, and she sees the world only through the reflection in a large mirror. She sees knights and lovers and life passing by, but she can never participate. She is a spectator to her own existence. This was Elvis's life. Graceland was his tower. The world outside was Camelot, a place of life and activity that he could no longer freely join. He couldn't go to a movie theater or a restaurant without causing a riot. So like the Lady of Shalott, he experienced the world through a reflection. His mirrors were the television screens. He famously had multiple TVs, often watching 3 at once. He watched the news, he watched old movies, he watched other people living the normal lives he couldn't have. He saw life, but he was not in it. The curse for the Lady of Shalott is mysterious. For Elvis, the curse was his own face, his own fame. It was a blessing that became a burden. In the poem, the lady grows half sick of shadows when she sees 2 young lovers in her mirror. She is tired of a second-hand life. This moment of crisis is triggered when she sees the brave Sir Lancelot riding by. His image is so brilliant, so full of life, that she defies the curse. She turns from her mirror and looks directly out the window at Camelot. Elvis had a similar moment. It was his 1968 comeback special. After years of making terrible movies, of being a shadow of his former self, he took a risk. He went on television dressed in black leather and reminded the world who he was. He was raw, powerful, and real. For a moment, he broke the curse. He looked directly at the world, not through the filter of a Hollywood script. But the aftermath was not freedom. The mirror cracked, just as it did for the Lady of Shalott. The curse came upon her, and she left her tower, found a boat, and floated down the river to Camelot, dying before she reached it. For Elvis, the comeback led not to a new life of artistic freedom, but to a new, more intense prison Las Vegas. He was put back in a different kind of tower, the hotel suite. The curse of his fame, managed by Colonel Parker, simply found a new, more profitable form. He had looked out the window, but the world was too much. He retreated back into the shadows, this time fueled by prescription drugs, until he too drifted away. Was his constant need for company, his Memphis Mafia, an attempt to bring the world into his tower since he could not go out into the world? Did he see his own reflection in the thousands of adoring fans, or did he just see a distorted image of a man he no longer recognized? And if he had the choice to smash the mirror and end the curse, even if it meant destroying himself, would he have taken it? Number 14, did he suffer the fate of the great American dreamer? The American dream is a powerful myth. It's the idea that anyone, no matter how humble their origins, can achieve immense success through hard work and determination. F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby, is the ultimate story about the promise and the corruption of that dream. The parallels between the fictional Jay Gatsby and the real-life Elvis Presley are uncanny. Both were poor boys who reinvented themselves, amassed incredible wealth, and threw lavish parties, all while chasing an idealized version of love and happiness that remained just out of reach. Jay Gatsby, born James Gatz, came from a poor farming family in the Midwest. He created a new persona, the sophisticated and mysterious Jay Gatsby, to escape his past and win the love of the wealthy Daisy Buchanan. Elvis Presley came from a two-room shack in Tupelo, Mississippi. He too created a larger-than-life persona, Elvis the King, a figure of unprecedented cool and charisma. Both men used their newfound identities to build empires. Gatsby's mansion in West Egg is a symbol of his new wealth. It's a place of spectacular, non-stop parties filled with people he doesn't know. He hosts these parties hoping that one day Daisy will wander in. Graceland was Elvis's West Egg. It was his gaudy, sprawling mansion, a testament to how far he had come. It was also a place of constant activity, filled with his entourage, friends, and family. The parties and the people were a buffer against a deep and profound loneliness. Like Gatsby, Elvis was often an isolated figure in the middle of his own circus. The writer Nick Carraway, Gatsby's neighbor, observes, "I have an idea that Gatsby himself didn't believe in it. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way." The same could be said of Elvis and his persona. The central tragedy for both men is their pursuit of an idealized love. Gatsby's entire life is structured around winning back Daisy, a woman he loved when he was a poor soldier. But he's in love with a memory, an idea of her, not the real person. Elvis's great love was Priscilla Beaulieu. He met her when she was just 14, and he was 24 and serving in the army in Germany. He molded her, shaped her into his ideal woman. He brought her to Graceland and eventually married her. But he was in love with the idea of the pure, perfect child bride. When she became a woman with her own needs and desires, the dream began to crumble. Their divorce in 1973 was a devastating blow. Like Gatsby losing Daisy, it was the moment the green light at the end of the dock finally went out. The end for both men is lonely and tragic. Gatsby is shot and killed, mistaken for someone else, and almost no one comes to his funeral. His grand dream collapses into a pathetic, lonely death. Elvis dies alone on his bathroom floor, his body ravaged by prescription drugs. His death was a global event, but the man himself had been isolated for years. Both men achieved the American dream in its most extreme form: the money, the fame, the power. But they both discovered it was hollow. As Fitzgerald wrote, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. Both he and Elvis spent their lives reaching for something that was already in the past. Was Priscilla his Daisy, an impossible ideal that could never be truly possessed? Was Graceland just a bigger, more elaborate version of Gatsby's mansion, a stage for a lonely man to play the part of a king? And does the story of Elvis prove that the American dream is not a promise of happiness, but a recipe for beautiful, spectacular disaster? Number 13 was his quest for badges of modern chivalry. In his later years, Elvis Presley developed a series of strange obsessions. One of the most famous was his fixation on collecting official police badges. He had badges from police departments all over the country. This culminated in a bizarre and now famous meeting with President Richard Nixon on December 21st, 1970, where Elvis requested and received a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He wanted to be a federal agent at large. This quest seems absurd, the whim of a spoiled celebrity. But seen through a literary lens, it looks like something else entirely: a quixotic quest. Miguel de Cervantes' novel Don Quixote, published in two parts in 1605 and 1615, is about a Spanish nobleman who reads so many chivalric romances that he loses his sanity and decides to become a knight-errant himself. He dubs himself Don Quixote de la Mancha and sets out to right wrongs and bring justice to the world. His adventures are a series of comical misinterpretations. He famously attacks windmills, believing them to be ferocious giants. He is a ridiculous figure, but he is also noble. He is driven by a powerful, if misguided, idealism. Elvis was a modern-day Don Quixote. He wasn't mad, but he lived in a world so detached from reality that his perceptions were skewed. He saw the world as being in a state of moral decay, corrupted by drug culture, hippies, and anti-American sentiment ironic, given his own prescription drug abuse. Like Quixote, he wanted to be a knight. He wanted to fight for a cause. His windmills were the social ills he saw on television from inside Graceland. His quest for a federal badge was his attempt to get his armor, to become a real hero, not just a musical one. Don Quixote has his faithful squire, Sancho Panza, a pragmatic peasant who follows him out of a mixture of loyalty and self-interest. And Elvis had his Memphis Mafia. They were his squires, enabling his whims, accompanying him on his strange journeys. The trip to the White House was a perfect example. His friend Jerry Schilling helped arrange the whole thing. They were his Sancho Panzas, grounding him in some reality, but also participating in his fantasies. The letter Elvis wrote to Nixon to request the meeting is a fascinating document. It reads like a manifesto from a man desperate for purpose. He wrote, "The drug culture, the hippie elements, the SDS, Black Panthers, etc., do not consider me as their enemy, or as they call it, the establishment. I call it America, and I love it. Sir, I can and will be of any service that I can to help the country out." This is the language of a knight pledging his fealty to his king. He saw the badge not as a toy, but as a symbol of real power and moral authority. It was a way to fight the giants he saw threatening his kingdom. Like Don Quixote, there was something both sad and admirable about Elvis's quest. It was a cry for help from a man who had everything and nothing. He had fame, but not respect. He had power, but no agency. He wanted to matter in a way that went beyond screaming fans and gold records. He wanted to be a force for good, even if his understanding of what that meant was naive and contradictory. Well, he was, as the literary critic Harold Bloom said of Don Quixote, a fountain of energy, directed by a noble madness. Was his obsession with law enforcement a desperate attempt to impose order on his own chaotic life? Were the badges just another costume for a man who had spent his life playing a role? Or was he, like the Mad Knight of La Mancha, genuinely trying to be a hero in a world he no longer understood? Number 12, was he a boy who refused to grow up? Elvis Presley never seemed to fully become an adult. Even in his 40s, there was a childlike quality to him. He loved cartoons, practical jokes, and amusement parks. He surrounded himself with a group of male friends who functioned like a gang of neighborhood kids. This wasn't just a quirky personality trait, it was a deep-seated psychological pattern, one that has a famous literary name, the Peter Pan syndrome. J.M. Barrie's 1904 play in 1/9. One novel, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, tells the story of a mischievous boy who can fly and never ages. He lives on the island of Neverland as the leader of his gang, the Lost Boys. Peter Pan represents eternal youth, adventure, and the rejection of adult responsibility. It's a charming fantasy, but it has a dark side. Peter is also selfish, forgetful, and incapable of real emotional connection. He can't love Wendy in an adult way. He can only see her as a mother figure. Elvis was the Peter Pan of rock and roll. His Neverland was Graceland. It was a fantasy world where his every whim was catered to. If he wanted to go to the movies, he would rent out the entire theater for him and his friends. If he wanted to ride go-karts, he would have a track built. Famously, he once rented out an entire Memphis amusement park, the Libertyland, just so he and his small group of friends could ride the roller coasters all night without being bothered. He was the boy who could fly, at least financially. His entourage, the Memphis Mafia, were his Lost Boys. They lived with him, worked for him, and played with him. They engaged in mock karate fights, had water gun battles, and rode around on motorcycles. They were a band of brothers, fiercely loyal to their leader, living in a bubble of perpetual adolescence. They were insulated from the real world, just like the boys in Neverland. Their job, in many ways, was to protect Elvis from the responsibilities and realities of adulthood. The dark side of the Peter Pan archetype is also painfully present in Elvis's story. His marriage to Priscilla suffered because he was unable to be a true partner. He expected her to be his Wendy, to take care of him and cater to his needs, while he was free to have his adventures. In her 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me, Priscilla wrote about how he tried to preserve her as a living doll, a child who would never change. This inability to handle an adult relationship is central to Peter Pan's character. The psychologist Dan Kiley coined the term Peter Pan syndrome in 1983 to describe men who have the bodies of adults but the minds of boys. He identified traits like narcissism, irresponsibility, and a fear of loneliness. And Elvis exhibited all of these. His generosity was legendary, but it was also a form of control. His irresponsibility with his health and finances was enabled by those around him. And his fear of being alone was so profound that he almost always had someone from his entourage sleeping in the same room. Was his obsession with youth and play a defense against the crushing pressures of being the king? Did creating his own Neverland at Graceland ultimately prevent him from ever finding true happiness in the real world? And like Peter Pan, was he so afraid of growing up that he chose unconsciously a path that would ensure he never grew old? Number 11. Was he a modern-day prisoner in an iron mask? The image of Elvis in his later years is as iconic as the image of him in his youth. The sequin jumpsuit, the big sunglasses, the elaborate belt, the jet black hair. It was a costume. It was a uniform. It was also a mask. He was one of the most famous people in the world, but the man himself had disappeared. He was trapped behind a persona, a situation that recalls Alexandre Dumas's 1850 novel, The Man in the Iron Mask. The novel, part of the D'Artagnan romances, tells the story of a mysterious prisoner held in the Bastille during the reign of King Louis XIV of France. The prisoner is forced to wear an iron mask at all times, his identity a state secret. It is eventually revealed that he is the identical twin brother of the king. He is imprisoned to prevent any challenge to the throne. He is a man whose face is a threat, so it must be hidden. Elvis's mask wasn't made of iron, it was made of celebrity. His famous face, the one that had caused riots and made millions of girls swoon, became his prison. He couldn't show it in public without being mobbed. The mask he wore in the 1970s, the Vegas Elvis, was a way of dealing with this. It was an exaggerated, almost cartoonish version of himself. The jumpsuit was his armor and his disguise. It created a distance between the performer on stage and the man inside. When he put on the costume, he became Elvis, the living legend. The problem was, he could never truly take it off. Like the prisoner in Dumas's novel, Elvis's true identity became a secret. The public knew the mask, the image, the legend. Very few people knew the man who was lonely, insecure, and in chronic pain. The historian Elaine Dundee, in her book Elvis and Gladys, argued that Elvis's identity was fundamentally shaped by his early life and his relationship with his mother. The simple Southern boy was still there, but he was buried under layers of fame and expectation. He was a prisoner of the king he had become. The Iran mask of his fame also isolated him from his own art. In the 1960s, he was trapped in his Hollywood contract, churning out bland movie musicals. His musical identity was hidden, suppressed. The 1968 comeback special was a moment where he took off the mask and showed the world the real artist again. But the success of that special just led to the creation of a new, more glittering mask for Las Vegas. Colonel Parker understood that the mask, the legend, was what sold tickets, not the man. The prisoner in the Iron Mask is a tragic figure because he is denied his own identity. He is a non-person, a political secret. Elvis, too, became a kind of non-person. He was a product, a brand, an industry. The needs of Elvis, the man, were secondary to the demands of Elvis, the business. His health, his happiness, his artistic desires all were sacrificed to maintain the image. He was a king and a prisoner at the same time, his face, both his fortune and his curse. Did he create the Vegas persona as a way to hide, or was it the only way he knew how to be himself in front of an audience? If he could have walked down the street anonymously for one day, what would he have done? And in the end, who died on that bathroom floor, the man or the mask? Number 10, was he the king as a tragic hero? The concept of the tragic hero comes to us from ancient Greece, most famously defined by the philosopher Aristotle in his work Poetics. A tragic hero is a person of noble stature who is destined for a downfall. This downfall is not a matter of pure bad luck. It is brought about by what Aristotle called hamartia, a fatal flaw, or tragic error in judgment. The story of Elvis Presley fits this ancient template with heartbreaking precision. Think of Oedipus from Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex. Oedipus is a great king beloved by his people. He is smart, decisive, and dedicated. His fatal flaw is his pride, his hubris, and his ignorance of his own origins. His relentless search for the truth about the plague afflicting his city leads him to the horrifying discovery that he has unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. His greatness is the very thing that destroys him. Elvis was a king of a new kind of kingdom. His noble stature came not from birth, but from an almost supernatural talent and charisma. He was beloved by millions. His fatal flaw was not pride in the same way as Oedipus, but a combination of things: a deep-seated naivete, a desperate need to be loved, and an almost childlike trust in the people who managed his life, particularly Colonel Tom Parker. This trust was his tragic error in judgment. He ceded control of his career and, by extension, his life to a man who prioritized profit above all else. Another classic tragic hero is Shakespeare's King Lear. Lear is a powerful king who, in a moment of vanity, decides to divide his kingdom between his 3 daughters based on who loves him most. He falls for the false flattery of his 2 evil daughters and banishes the one, Cordelia, who truly loves him. This single error in judgment leads to his complete downfall. He loses his kingdom, his sanity, and his life. Elvis's story has a similar arc. In his early years, he had an instinctive, rebellious energy that was authentic. His error was allowing that energy to be tamed and commodified by Hollywood and Las Vegas. And he banished the authentic, dangerous part of himself, his artistic Cordelia, in favor of the safe, profitable formulas offered by his manager. Like Lear wandering on the heath, Elvis in his later years was a man adrift, surrounded by a court of jesters and flatterers, having lost the very thing that made him king in the first place. The downfall of a tragic hero is meant to evoke pity and fear in the audience. We feel pity for the suffering hero and fear that a similar fate could befall us. The public's reaction to Elvis's decline and death was exactly this. The images of him, overweight and unwell, were shocking. His death was a global tragedy. We saw a man who had reached the highest heights of success fall to the lowest depths of despair and addiction. It was a terrifying spectacle because it showed that no amount of money or adoration could save a person from their own fatal flaws. Was his greatest flaw his loyalty to the colonel, a man who saw him as property? Or was it his inability to say no, a product of his humble upbringing and desire to please? And like all great tragic heroes, was his downfall inevitable from the moment he first stepped on the world stage? Number 9, was he a man who lost his shadow? In folklore and literature, a person's shadow is often more than just a trick of the light. It is a symbol of the soul, the dark or hidden part of the self. To lose one's shadow is to become incomplete, to lose one's connection to the real world. This strange and powerful idea is at the heart of the 1814 German novella Peter Schlemihl's Miraculous Story by Adalbert von Chamisso. It's a story that has a bizarre resonance with Elvis's life of fame. In the story, Peter Schlemihl is a poor man who meets a mysterious gray man, the devil in disguise. The gray man offers Schlemihl a bottomless purse of gold. The price is not his soul, but something seemingly worthless, his shadow. Schlemihl agrees, thinking it's a great deal. He becomes incredibly wealthy, but he soon discovers his mistake. Without a shadow, he is an outcast. People are horrified by him. He cannot walk in the sun. He is shunned and isolated, his wealth a useless comfort. He has lost his substance, his connection to humanity. It's Elvis Presley, in a way, sold his shadow. He made a deal not with the devil, but with fame. The price was his ordinary life, his anonymity. Like Schlemihl, he got the bottomless purse of gold. But he lost the ability to be a normal person. He lost the ability to walk in the sun. His life became nocturnal. He slept all day and was awake all night, a prisoner in Graceland. He was a man without a shadow, a figure so bright and famous that he cast no darkness, no normal human outline. The literary critic Carl Jung wrote extensively about the shadow as an archetype. For Jung, the shadow represents the unconscious, the parts of ourselves that we repress or deny. A healthy person must integrate their shadow. Elvis's life was a battle with his own shadow. The Goodson image, the polite Southern gentleman, was the public persona. But His shadow self, the angry, frustrated, and addicted man, was always there. He couldn't integrate it, he could only suppress it with drugs and distractions. The celebrity Elvis was all light, which meant the private Elvis was plunged into deeper and deeper darkness. The tragedy of Peter Schlemil is his profound loneliness. He can buy anything, but he can't buy a friend or a lover who isn't repulsed by his condition. And Elvis, too, was surrounded by people but was fundamentally alone. The people around him were drawn to his light, his fame, his money. They were part of the world of Elvis the King, but could they truly connect with the shadowless man? Priscilla Presley's memoir touches on this. She loved the man, but she struggled to live with the legend. By the end of his life, Elvis was like Schlemil, a wealthy outcast wandering the world alone. His world was not the physical globe, but the confined spaces of his home, his hotel suites, and his private jet. He had everything a person could desire, but he had lost the one thing he couldn't buy back in normal life. He was a phantom, a being of pure light and image, disconnected from the very ground he walked on. Did he realize what he had given up in exchange for his fame? Was his anger and pill-popping a desperate attempt to feel real, to find the shadow he had lost? And is it possible for anyone to live under the constant, shadow-destroying glare of global fame and remain a whole human being? Number 8, was he a modern day Ahab chasing a white whale? Herman Melville's 1851 masterpiece, Moby Dick, is more than a story about a whale. It's a story about obsession. Captain Ahab is a man who has lost his leg to a great white whale, Moby Dick. He becomes consumed by a monomaniacal desire for revenge. He will hunt the whale to the ends of the earth, sacrificing his ship, his crew, and his own life to achieve his goal. Ahab's quest is a metaphor for any all-consuming obsession that leads to self-destruction. In his later years, Elvis Presley was his own kind of Captain Ahab. His ship was his career, his body was his vessel, and he was hunting his own white whale. But what was it? It wasn't one single thing. It was a combination of elusive, impossible goals. His white whale was the thrill of his early success, the purity of his mother's love, a sense of spiritual enlightenment, and the artistic respect that he felt had always been denied to him. You know, one of the primary obsessions was recapturing the past. The 1968 comeback special was a triumphant moment where he seemed to have his whale in his sights. He was lean, dangerous, and brilliant, but that success was fleeting. He spent the rest of his life chasing that feeling, trying to be that man again on the Las Vegas stage. The jumpsuits got more elaborate, the performances more erratic, as he tried to recreate a moment that was gone forever. Like Ahab, he was chasing a phantom. Another aspect of his obsession was his spiritual quest. As detailed in books like Peter Guralnick's Careless Love, Elvis was a voracious reader of spiritual and esoteric books. He was fascinated by numerology, theosophy, and different world religions. He was searching for answers, for a meaning to his extraordinary and isolated life. He would talk for hours on end to his friends about these subjects, dragging his crew along on his metaphysical journey. But enlightenment, like the white whale, is not something that can be conquered. His search became another frantic, endless pursuit that offered no peace. The most destructive hunt was the one against his own body. He was chasing youth and vitality through a sea of prescription drugs. He took pills to sleep, pills to wake up, pills for pain, pills for energy. He was at war with his own aging and declining health. He put his body, his ship, through a punishing schedule of performances, all while trying to maintain the illusion of being the timeless king. Like Ahab, he ignored all warnings. His friends, his doctors, his own body told him to stop, but the obsession was too strong. He was the captain, and he would not be deterred. Ahab's final words are, "To the last I grapple with thee, from hell's heart I stab at thee for hate's sake. I spit my last breath at thee." You know, it's a cry of defiant, self-destructive rage. You know, Elvis's end was quieter, but no less tragic. He was found on the floor, his body finally broken by the impossible chase. He had hunted his white whale's perfect performance, spiritual truth, eternal youth, and in the end, they had pulled him under. Was there any single moment that could have convinced him to give up the chase? Were the members of the Memphis Mafia his Starbuck, the cautious first mate who tries to reason with the captain, but ultimately fails? Or was his obsessive nature the very thing that made him great in the first place, and therefore was his self-destruction always inevitable? Number 7, was his life governed by a Kafkaesque system? Franz Kafka was a Czech writer whose name has become an adjective. Kafkaesque describes a situation that is bizarrely complex, illogical, and oppressive, where an individual is trapped by bureaucratic forces they cannot understand or control. His most famous works, like The Trial 1925 and The Castle 1926, depict protagonists caught in nightmarish systems of power. The life of Elvis Presley, particularly his later career, was profoundly Kafkaesque. In The Trial, the protagonist, Joseph K., is arrested one morning for a crime that is never explained to him. He spends the rest of an increasingly absurd and frustrating novel trying to navigate a judicial system with nonsensical rules and inaccessible authorities. He is a victim of a process, a cog in a machine he cannot see. Elvis was the Joseph K. of the entertainment industry. He was trapped not by a legal system, but by a system of contracts and commercial obligations managed by Colonel Tom Parker. From the outside, Elvis was the king, the most powerful man in show business. But in reality, he was powerless. He was arrested by his first contract, and he never escaped. The crime he was paying for was his own talent. Consider his Hollywood career in the 1960s. He was bound by contract to make up to 3 movies a year. He hated the scripts. He knew the songs were terrible. He expressed his frustration to his friends. But he was trapped. The system was already in motion. The contracts were signed. The deals were made by Parker. Like Joseph K. trying to find the high court judges, Elvis could never seem to get to the source of power to change his own fate. The colonel was the gatekeeper, and the colonel's logic was purely financial, a bureaucratic rationale that had no room for artistic concerns. The Las Vegas years were the ultimate Kafkaesque nightmare. The contract with the International Hotel was a masterpiece of oppressive bureaucracy. It locked him into a relentless schedule of performances for years. He became a function, not a person. He was the 8 p.m. show and the midnight show. His life was reduced to a timetable. His health problems, his exhaustion, his pleas for a lighter schedule, none of it mattered. The system demanded his presence on stage. The machine had to be fed. In Kafka's The Castle, the protagonist, K, is a land surveyor who is summoned to a village but can never gain access to the castle where the authorities who hired him reside. He is forever an outsider trying to understand the rules of a game he is forced to play. This was Elvis's relationship with the world. He was the most famous man on the planet, but he was an outsider to normal life. He was summoned by fame, but he could never gain access to the castle of ordinary existence. He was trapped in the village of his own celebrity, subject to its strange and unforgiving rules. The final, tragic element of a Kafkaesque story is its senseless end. Joseph K. is executed without ever finding out what he was accused of. Elvis's death was similarly absurd. He died from an overdose of prescription drugs given to him by doctors to keep him functional enough to meet the demands of the oppressive system he was trapped in. The very things meant to help him were what killed him. He was a casualty of a machine of his own creation. Was Colonel Parker the faceless bureaucrat of Elvis's life, or was he just another part of a larger, more impersonal system of celebrity? Could Elvis have escaped if he had simply torn up the contracts, or was he psychologically trapped as well? And is the modern celebrity machine inherently Kafkaesque, designed to consume the very individuals it elevates? Number 6, was he the ultimate American creation myth? The story of Pygmalion is an ancient Greek myth, famously retold by the Roman poet Ovid in his Metamorphoses. Pygmalion is a sculptor who carves a statue of a woman so beautiful that he falls in love with it. He prays to the goddess Venus, who takes pity on him and brings the statue Galatea to life. It's a story about a creator falling in love with his own creation. This myth was given a modern social twist in George Bernard Shaw's 1913 play, Pygmalion, which later became the musical My Fair Lady. In Shaw's version, a phonetics professor, Henry Higgins, makes a bet that he can take a poor flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, and transform her into a lady who can pass in high society. The life of Elvis Presley is a fascinating, multi-layered Pygmalion story. There were several creators, and it's not always clear who was the sculptor and who was the clay. In the first version of the story, the Pygmalion figure is Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records in Memphis. Phillips had a vision. As he famously, perhaps apocryphally said, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." He was looking for a specific creation. When the young Elvis Presley walked into his studio in 1954, Phillips found his raw material. He guided Elvis, stripped away some of his sentimentality, and paired him with the right musicians, Scotty Moore and Bill Black. He sculpted the sound that would change the world. He was the Henry Higgins who heard the potential in the rough, unrefined voice. The second, and more dominant, Pygmalion was Colonel Tom Parker. If Phillips sculpted the artist, Parker sculpted the star. He took the raw talent and packaged it for mass consumption. He created the brand, the image, the myth of Elvis. So he booked the television shows, he controlled the press, he engineered the entire career trajectory. He was a cynical Henry Higgins, transforming the flower boy from Tupelo into a king, not for the sake of art, but for the sake of a bet with the world that he could make him the biggest star imaginable. The problem is that, like Shaw's Eliza Doolittle, the creation eventually develops its own consciousness, and Eliza rebels against Higgins' control. Elvis, however, never fully rebelled against Parker. But there is a third, more complex version of the story. Perhaps Elvis himself was his own Pygmalion. He was the sculptor of his own persona. He was the one who synthesized his influences, blues, gospel, country, pop rhythmic, into a unique style. He was the one who created the look, the attitude, the famous sneer. He took the raw material of Elvis Aaron Presley, a shy mama's boy, and carved him into Elvis the Pelvis, a figure of seismic cultural importance. He then fell in love with his own creation, dedicating his life to maintaining it. In Shaw's play, the central conflict is Eliza's struggle for independence. She learns to speak like a lady, but she wants to be treated like one, not as an experiment. This is where the analogy with Elvis becomes tragic. He never had his Eliza moment of breaking free. He remained bound to his creator, the Colonel. Or, if he was his own creator, he remained in love with his own statue, unable to let it evolve or change in a natural way. He was trapped by the perfection of his own myth. Was Sam Phillips's vision a lucky break or an act of cynical cultural appropriation? Did Colonel Parker ever see Elvis as a human being, or was he always just a beautiful, profitable statue? And was Elvis the master of his own image, or did the image he created end up mastering him? Number 5, was his betrayal written in the Bible? Elvis Presley was a deeply religious man. He grew up singing gospel music in the Assembly of God Church, and the Bible was a book he returned to throughout his life for comfort and guidance. It is deeply ironic, then, that his life story so closely parallels one of the most famous religious narratives, the story of a messianic figure who is worshipped, betrayed by his inner circle, and ultimately sacrificed. In literary terms, this is the Christ figure archetype. A Christ figure is a character in a work of literature who shares many traits with Jesus Christ. This doesn't mean they are divine, but that their story follows a similar pattern. They challenge the established order, gather a group of followers, disciples, are betrayed by one of them, and then suffer a form of martyrdom that leads to their resurrection as a symbol or legend. Elvis was the king, a secular messiah. His coming in the 1950s was a cultural second coming. He challenged the staid, conservative order of his time with his music and his sexuality. He gathered his own disciples, the Memphis Mafia. This group of friends and employees formed his inner circle. They lived with him, traveled with him, and protected him. They were his Peter, his John, his James. And inevitably, there was a Judas. In 1977, just weeks before Elvis's death, 3 former members of the Memphis Mafia, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, published a tell-all book called Elvis: What Happened. The book exposed the dark side of the king's life, his violent temper, his spiritual obsessions, and, most damningly, his severe prescription drug addiction. For the public, it was a shocking revelation. For Elvis, it was the ultimate betrayal. He felt that his most trusted friends had sold him out for money, the proverbial 30 pieces of silver. The book's authors claimed their motive was a form of love, an attempt to shock Elvis into confronting his addiction. They were the Judases who claimed their betrayal served a higher purpose, but the effect on Elvis was devastating. According to those who were with him in his final days, he was heartbroken and humiliated. The betrayal by those he considered brothers was a crushing blow to a man already in a fragile state. His death on August 16, 1977, was his martyrdom. He died for the sins of a culture that demands its idols be perfect gods and then feasts on the details of their human failings. And then came the resurrection. In death, Elvis became bigger than he had ever been in life. He became a true myth. The sightings, the conspiracy theories that he faked his death, the eternal presence of his image, like, it's a form of cultural immortality, like a religious figure. He lives on in the hearts of his believers. This pattern is not unique to Elvis. Many literary works use this archetype to explore themes of sacrifice and redemption. In Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1962, the rebellious Randall McMurphy is a Christ figure who battles the tyrannical Nurse Ratched, is betrayed and is lobotomized, but his sacrifice inspires the other patients to find their own freedom. Elvis's sacrifice didn't free anyone, but it did cement his status as a permanent cultural icon. Was the tell-all book a malicious act of betrayal or a misguided attempt to save a friend's life? Did Elvis see himself in these biblical terms as a persecuted figure, and is the public's fascination with the fall of its idols a modern form of the crucifixion story, a ritual we need to keep repeating? Number 4, did he ever truly escape his mother's shadow? The death of a parent is a universal human experience, but for some, it is the defining event of their lives, an emotional wound that shapes everything that follows. In literature, the character most famously haunted by a parent is Prince Hamlet from William Shakespeare's play of the same name. Hamlet's life is thrown into chaos by the death of his father and his mother's hasty remarriage to his uncle. His grief is so profound it borders on madness. The story of Elvis Presley's relationship with his mother Gladys and his reaction to her death is a real-life tragedy on a Hamlet-like scale. Gladys Presley died on August 14, 1958, at the age of 46. Elvis was 23 and at the peak of his initial fame serving in the U.S. Army. He was granted emergency leave to come home, and by all accounts his grief was monumental. He wept uncontrollably at her funeral, throwing himself over her casket. He had lost not just his mother, but his anchor, his confidante, and his biggest fan. As he told a friend years later, "It's all over for me. I'll never be happy again." Hamlet's grief is complicated by his feelings about his mother, Gertrude. He is disgusted by her quick marriage to Claudius, seeing it as a betrayal of his father's memory. His famous line, "Frailty, thy name is woman," is directed at her. Elvis's relationship with Gladys was one of intense, uncomplicated adoration, but after her death, he also faced a situation with a new maternal figure. His father, Vernon, eventually remarried a woman named Dee Stanley. Elvis never truly accepted her. He was polite but distant. She was, in a way, his Gertrude, an intruder who had taken his mother's place in his father's life. The central theme of Hamlet is a young man paralyzed by grief and a sense of duty. He is tasked by his father's ghost to avenge his murder, but he delays and procrastinates. He is lost in thought, in to be, or not to be. After Gladys's death, Elvis also seemed to lose his direction. He finished his army service and returned to a career that was now fully under the control of Colonel Parker. The rebellious, energetic fire of the 1950s was gone. He entered his Hollywood phase, a long period of artistic procrastination where he made a string of bland, forgettable movies. He was going through the motions, a prince without a purpose. The psychoanalyst Ernest Jones famously argued in his 1949 book Hamlet and Oedipus that Hamlet's paralysis was due to an unresolved Oedipus complex. His rage at his uncle was intensified because Claudius had done what Hamlet unconsciously wanted to do, kill his father and possess his mother. While Elvis's relationship with Gladys was not incestuous, it was, as documented by biographer Elaine Dundee, exceptionally close and possessive. Her death left a void that no one, not even his wife Priscilla, could ever fill. He spent the rest of his life searching for the unconditional love and security that he had lost. Was his later search for spiritual gurus and father figures like Colonel Parker an attempt to find the guidance he lost when Gladys died? Did the trauma of her death lock him in a state of perpetual boyhood, unable to fully mature without her? And like Hamlet was his entire life after 1958, a long, tragic play about a son who could never get over the loss of his mother. Number 3, was he a monster created by a mad scientist? Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is often mistaken as a simple monster story. It is not. It is a profound and tragic story about creation, responsibility, and abandonment. Dr. Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant and ambitious scientist, discovers the secret to creating life. He assembles a creature from old body parts and brings it to life. But when he sees his creation, he is horrified by its ugliness and abandons it. The creature, intelligent and sensitive, is left to fend for itself in a world that fears and hates it. The monster is not born evil. It is made evil by the cruelty and rejection of its creator and society. This is, in many ways, the story of Elvis Presley and his creator, the public. Elvis was not assembled from body parts, but he was a creation. He was stitched together from the sounds of black rhythm and blues and white country music, from the swagger of a street tough and the politeness of a southern boy. The mad scientists who first brought this creation to life were men like Sam Phillips. But the true Dr. Frankenstein was the culture itself. Society was obsessed with creating a new kind of celebrity, a teen idol, a king. And in Elvis, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. In the beginning, like Victor Frankenstein with his project, the world was fascinated by its creation. Elvis was beautiful, talented, a marvel, but then, just as quickly, came the horror and rejection. The establishment was terrified by him. Ministers preached against him from the pulpit. His swiveling hips were deemed vulgar and dangerous. On The Ed Sullivan Show in 1957, he was famously filmed only from the waist up. He was a monster who needed to be controlled. The most poignant part of Shelley's novel is the creature's own story. He learns to speak and read, and he feels deep emotions. His greatest desire is for companionship, for a connection. He tells Frankenstein, "I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind?" This is the cry of the abandoned. Elvis, too, was shunned and hated by a part of society, but he was also adored by millions. This created a different kind of misery. He was not an outcast in the same way as the creature, but he was just as isolated. His fame made normal human connection impossible. He was a god, a king, a monster of celebrity, and anything but a normal man. Like Frankenstein's creature, Elvis's frustration sometimes erupted in rage. The stories of him shooting out television sets are legendary. These were the tantrums of a powerful being trapped in a world he didn't create and couldn't control. He was a creature of immense strength and sensitivity, but he had no one to guide him. His creator, the public, and his manager, the colonel, were only interested in what he could do for them, not in his own happiness or well-being. Victor Frankenstein's ultimate failure is his refusal to take responsibility for his creation. He lets his monster wander the world, causing destruction, until it leads to his own ruin. The culture that created Elvis also failed to take responsibility for him. It built him up into a mythic figure, and then stood by and watched as the pressures of that myth destroyed him. We created the monster of fame, and then we were shocked when it consumed the man. Was Elvis's anger the justifiable rage of a sensitive soul treated like a freak? Did he ever feel like a monster, an unnatural creation that didn't belong in the world? And who is the bigger monster, the creation who is different, or the creator who abandons what he has made? Number 2, was he a prisoner who decorated his own cell? Imagine being a king who can never leave his castle. Imagine having all the money in the world, but being unable to walk down the street to buy a newspaper. This was the reality of Elvis Presley's life. He was a prisoner of his own fame, and his prison was Graceland. This strange existence, a life of luxurious confinement, has a powerful parallel in a place you might not expect the fairy tales collected by the Brothers Grimm. Specifically, the story of Rapunzel. In the tale, Rapunzel is a beautiful girl who is taken by a witch and locked away in a tall tower in the middle of a forest. The tower has no doors and no stairs, only a single window at the very top. When the witch wants to enter, she stands at the bottom and calls out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel then lets her famously long, golden hair fall to the ground for the witch to climb. She is a prisoner, isolated from the world, with her only connection being her captor. Elvis was Rapunzel. His tower was Graceland. It was a beautiful place, a mansion he could decorate however he wanted, like the famous Jungle Room, but it was a prison nonetheless. The high walls and gates were there to keep the public out, but they also kept him in. The forest surrounding his tower was the suffocating forest of his own celebrity. The witch, the captor who held the key to his confinement, was Colonel Tom Parker. Parker controlled all access to Elvis. He was the one who decided who got in and who didn't, what deals were made, what interviews were given. He kept Elvis isolated, convincing him it was for his own protection. Like the witch, he was the sole link between his prisoner and the outside world. And Elvis, like Rapunzel, seemed to accept his fate for a long time. He had everything he needed inside his tower, his friends, his family, his entertainment. He let down his hair, his talent, his performances, whatever the colonel commanded, allowing his captor to climb to ever greater heights of wealth. In the fairy tale, things change when a prince hears Rapunzel singing. He is enchanted and figures out how to visit her. He becomes her secret link to the outside world, a promise of escape. For Elvis, there was no single prince. But there were moments when he seemed to be searching for one. His spiritual quests, his late-night conversations, his brief affair with his co-star Anne Margaret, these were all attempts to find a connection, a way out of the tower. The 68 comeback special was his most successful escape attempt. For a moment, he broke free from the witch's control and connected directly with the world again. But the story of Elvis does not have a fairy tale ending. In the Grimm's version, the witch discovers the prince, cuts off Rapunzel's hair, and casts her out into the wilderness. The prince is blinded. It's a harsh story. Elvis's ending was also harsh. His brief escape to artistic relevance in 1968 only led to a new, more secure tower, the Las Vegas suite. The colonel, his witch, simply found a more profitable way to keep him locked up. He cut off Elvis's connection to the real, evolving world of music and left him to wander in the wilderness of drug addiction and nostalgia. Did Elvis know he was a prisoner, or did he convince himself that the tower was a palace? Was the Memphis Mafia his friend or his fellow prisoners, also trapped by the witch? And if a prince had come to rescue him, would he have even known how to live in the real world? Number one, was he the man who fell to earth? The most fundamental story in Western literature is the story of the fall from grace. It begins in the book of Genesis, with Adam and Eve being cast out of the Garden of Eden. It's the story of Lucifer, the most beautiful angel, being cast out of heaven for his pride. It is the story of a perfect or elevated being who, through some flaw or transgression, is brought low. This archetype resonates through thousands of years of storytelling, from John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost, 1667, to the modern superhero movie. It is also the perfect and most tragic description of the life of Elvis Presley. In the beginning, Elvis was an almost divine figure. He seemed to come from nowhere, a perfect being in an imperfect world. He was astonishingly beautiful. He had the voice of an angel, a bluesy, rebellious angel, and he moved with a grace that seemed supernatural. The 1950s were his Garden of Eden. It was a time of pure, explosive creativity. He was innocent in a way, unaware of the forces he was unleashing. He was Adam before the fall, a natural man in a world of his own making. The fall was not a single event. It was a slow, gradual descent. The first step was the death of his mother, Gladys. This was his first taste of mortal sorrow, the first crack in the perfect garden wall. The second step was his induction into the army. This took him out of his Eden and placed him into a structured, disciplined world that began to tame his wildness. The third and most significant step was the deal with Hollywood. This was the bite from the forbidden fruit of easy money. He traded his artistic integrity for commercial security. John Milton's Paradise Lost is the grandest telling of this story. His Satan is a complex, charismatic, and tragic figure. He is a fallen angel who declares it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. After his Hollywood years and during his Las Vegas residency, Elvis was, in a sense, reigning in his own private hell. It was a hell of his own making, a gilded cage of luxury and addiction. He was still the king, but he was the king of a diminished and isolated kingdom. He had chosen the comfortable hell of predictable performance over the difficult heaven of true artistic risk. The fall from grace is tragic because it involves the loss of potential. We see what the hero could have been. With Elvis, this feeling is overwhelming. After the 68 comeback special, he showed the world the artist he still was. He could have gone on to make incredible, meaningful music. He could have become a serious actor. The potential was there, but he fell back. He chose the easy path, the path laid out for him by Colonel Parker. His physical decline was the outward sign of his spiritual fall. The beautiful, angelic boy became a bloated, self-destructive man. It was as if his body was paying the price for the loss of his soul. He had been cast out of the garden of his youth, and like Adam and Eve, he was forced to live with the consequences of his choices. He was now mortal, subject to pain, aging, and death. The world watched his fall. We are both fascinated and horrified. The fall of a great figure is a powerful spectacle. It reminds us of our own frailties. If the king could fall, then anyone could. He was our Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and was punished for it for the rest of his days. What was his original sin, signing the contract, trusting the colonel, or simply being unable to handle the divine gift he was given? Could he ever have been redeemed, or was his fall, once started, an unstoppable descent? And when we tell the story of Elvis Presley, are we just retelling the oldest story we know, that even the most beautiful angels can be cast out of paradise?